Thank you. And can we laugh one more time for Ursula? And Patrick, you told me to do this, so hashtag thank you. So it's an honor to be here today. Thank you for attending the talk, and also thank you to the conference organizers for having me here. This is my third time to Canada, and inevitably every time I come here it's winter, so I don't know what the temperature is supposed to be tonight, but I hear it's negative 8 million or somewhere around there. This did set a personal record. It was 3 degrees Thursday night, and that's the coldest I'd ever been. I'm from Atlanta, and so that was quite cold. And then it got me thinking, what does everybody think about Georgia? I have my perceptions about cold in Canada, and then I started thinking, okay, maybe people think of Atlanta because we hosted the 1996 Olympics. Maybe you think of like the large companies that are based in Atlanta, like Home Depot and UPS and Delta and Coca-Cola. And then I started thinking, a lot of these folks probably think, when they think of Georgia, they think of Honey Boo Boo. And if you don't think of that, that's great. And if you don't know who she is, that's even better. But I wasn't brought here to talk about Honey Boo Boo, so we'll just kind of continue on with the talk on augmented reality. So a little bit about me. I'm a professor at what was formerly called Southern Polytechnic State University, which was a mouthful, as Patrick knows. But we now joined with a larger university called Kennesaw State University, which is this comprehensive 33,000 student kind of monstrosity. So SPSU is a little bit more of an engineering school than it was anything else. I've taught a wide variety of things in computing. I started out in information technology, and now I teach a lot of computer science, and also, I don't know why they pay me for this, but computer game design and development, which is just a blast. We focus a lot more on the development piece just because we're an engineering university. My PhD is in computer science, and I specialized in augmented reality, which is why I'm here today. I've also done my time in industry. So I was a chief software architect at a Manhattan-based firm doing mobile augmented reality applications. So I was designing them and developing them. And then also, I put this up here for a couple of reasons. First of all, I am an active gamer. So my guilty pleasure is Borderlands 2. Any Borderlands folks? It's an older game. And then I also have guilty esoteric games that I play, like Goat Simulator. Any Goat Sim fans? Not? Go Waterloo. So anyway, the reason that I bring that up is just because you'll see a couple of the examples. I didn't want this to be too focused in on gaming, but there's a lot of references to gaming because they tie into augmented reality pretty well. All right. I also didn't want this to be too academic, so the nice thing about a keynote is that you can stand on the shoulders of giants, and so I've pulled in a lot of the cooler examples that I've seen throughout industry, and I kind of integrated my own stuff to try to promote it, to say, hey, I would love to be one of these guys. But anyway, so as an overview, what we'll do is we'll talk about what augmented reality is, and I'm going to give you the traditional definition. It's slightly changing now just because the field is broadening a bit. We'll also look heavily at the requirements, and those are software requirements and hardware requirements. Talk about a brief history of augmented reality, and the reason is because I'm going to wildly speculate what's going to happen 50 years from now with augmented reality, and so it's a little bit of BS, to be honest, but you can kind of see the pattern of what's happening in augmented reality and then kind of predict where it's supposed to go. We'll look at mobile AR, and the reason that this is interesting is because it's kind of the current state of augmented reality. There's a lot of emphasis that's being pushed on that right now. We'll talk about the design challenges in AR apps, and then finish off with this wild speculation of what it's going to look like in the future. All right, so I like to know who I'm talking to, so I have a quick survey. How many of you have heard before this talk about AR? And I would assume that would be the case. So if everybody looks around, most people have heard of it, and because you're computing majors, that makes sense. How many of you know what AR is? Okay, less hands. How many have actually had an AR experience? Meaning that you've actively participated in something. Okay, so that's surprising right there. So about maybe 5–10%, something like that. And then how many of you actually have an AR app on your phone? Do you really? I'm glad I didn't do this. I was going to give $1 if somebody actually raised their hand, and I was going to have, show me, I want evidence of it, and then I would be broke because there's like 10 people in the room. You saw what PhD makes from the last speakers. Okay, well that's interesting, but you can see that it's still kind of in its nascent form right now. So AR is an interesting thing. The way that I got into it was actually, I remember it clearly. You have these well-defined points in your life, and I remember being at a conference in Glasgow. and it was in 1999, and we were waiting for like the next speaker, so it was kind of like this, where you've got some time in between, and so a friend of mine and I went up to his hotel room, and he said, "Oh, I've got to show you something," and he breaks out his laptop, and he plugs in his webcam, if you remember what webcams are, right? Plugs this thing in, and he throws this piece of paper down on the bed, and he points the webcam at it, and I look at the screen, and this is what I see. And I was blown away. And I knew from that point, I didn't even have to think about it, I knew that's what I wanted to research, because I saw so many possibilities about how we can interact with digital information and all of that kind of stuff. And so I started to move the camera around, and I was moving this piece of paper, and it was just a piece of paper, but it was just awesome. And so I was so serious about this, and I so firmly believe in this technology that I got a PhD in it. So it's not that I'm just making it up and it's all hype. I really believe that in the future, we're going to have AR applications in our everyday lives. All right. So what is it? There's been a lot of debates, a lot of interesting kinds of things. This was originally animated, but it was way too distracting, where she's like turning off the robot when she's doing that. But according to Zuma, Ron Azuma, he said that there are 3 major requirements for augmented reality. The first thing is that we have to embed virtual objects into the physical environment. So you can see it combines real and virtual objects. The next one is that it has to execute in real time. And what we're talking about real time isn't like a hard real-time system, it's more of a soft real-time system. So let's say 24 frames a second, 30 frames a second, something like that. But this eliminates things like major film. Like Jurassic Park had these dinosaurs that were running through that looked really great, right? And they were kind of registered in the world and everything else, but that doesn't really fit the category. It has to be done in real time. Next, it has to be registered with the real world. And when we're saying this, the virtual objects have to share the same coordinate system as the physical world. In other words, things have to line up. You can't just tattoo this virtual object out there into the physical space and say we have augmented reality. So I'm curious, how many people think that this is augmented reality? Well, it's Princess Leia. Who said who? What is that? Oh, help me. Okay, it's a hologram that's being projected. How many people think that it's not augmented reality? And how many people could care less? Because I see, it's a borderline case, right? So where I think it starts to fail is, do they really share the same coordinate system, the virtual and the physical? I think that's kind of loose. And then somebody asked me, and this was no joke, a 2-hour debate, is the holodeck in Star Trek augmented reality? And I still haven't formed an opinion on that. So think about that over the next 45 minutes while we're talking. Okay, what are the major parts of an augmented reality system? Well, clearly we have to have some way to see it, so we need some kind of display. We have to have the rendering of virtual objects, and this is typically done by your graphics card. There's no mystery there. We've been doing that for years and years. But then it gets really hard when it comes to tracking requirements. And by tracking, we're talking about following things, right? What is it that we would have to follow? Well, we'd have to follow the viewpoint of the user. We have to know where the person is located in space and also the direction that they're looking. That's highly important. So we have to be able to track this camera. It would also be good, it's not a requirement, but it would also be good if we could track the user's hands. Why is that so important? Because if I want to be able to start working with virtual things, it would be nice if I could use my hands to do it. That's the way that we naturally work. Other things would be important physical objects. So let's say that I wanted to augment this cup of water or something like that. I need to know where it is in the space so that everything lines up in the same coordinate system. And then finally, all of this stuff ties into something that's a little bit harder, and it's the methods of interaction. And that's where I spent most of my PhD, is in understanding how people are going to behave in these environments, because there's a lot of question marks that are out there. All right, so looking back, the first time I saw this picture, I thought it truly looked scary. It was like this mad scientist looking kind of thing, but it turns out it was Ivan Sutherland. And this was done way back in 1968. And I know if there are some earlier examples in 1968, but I really believe this is where it started. And he created this head-mounted 3-dimensional display. Now, if you look at it, all of these devices that are kind of hanging over his head is just to track this head-mounted display that's there. I don't know the technology that was used, honestly, but look closely at his face. He's got this giant contraption that's on there, and there's actually 2 projectors that are coming down, and he has this thing called an optical combiner, which is like this half-silvered mirror. So I could have these 2 discs that are in front of my eyes. I could still see the physical environment, but then these projectors, I could see what they're projecting at the same time, and then I would get this overlay of virtual stuff on the physical world. Does that make sense? Yes, Jeff, it does. A little bit later in the 1980s, I always thought this was interesting. Steve Mann and also Thad Starner, he's a big name in that area. They got into wearable computing, and this is kind of where it's going in the future, that we have to have computing with us. The part that really cracked me, I ripped this straight off of his blog down here, but look at the 1995 passport. That is beautiful. How did he get away with having this full-blown head-mounted display in his passport photo? And I'd also like to point out that he's Canadian, right? So you can see the Canadian passport. But he's done a lot of interesting stuff in in wearable computing. A little bit later, 1992, Tom Caudell and David Mizell coined the term augmented reality. These were former engineers from Boeing. That same year, you have the development of the Karma system, and this was what kind of the first major system that was out there. It's knowledge-based augmented reality for maintenance assistance. And so you can imagine that you have somebody who's trying to learn how to build something. Over here on the right-hand side, you can see there's this outline of where the paper tray should go. Now, most people would likely know where the paper tray went, but that wasn't the point. It was to say that you could guide somebody going through all of these physical tasks so that they would understand maybe the inner workings or exactly how things are supposed to work. The person that's on the left was actually on my dissertation committee. That's Blair McIntyre, and he's also Canadian, and he's also an awesome guy. A lot of Canadians in AR, I guess, right? So I've had a couple of discussions with some of you out there, and the big question was, what's the difference between virtual reality and augmented reality? And so in 1994, Milgram came up with this spectrum that you see here. And on the left-hand side, you see the purely physical environment. That's what we're experiencing right now. And then on the right-hand side, you have purely virtual environments, where everything's synthetic. And then it makes sense that augmented reality is somewhere in the middle, right? Naturally more towards the left, because what we're doing is we have more of the physical environment than we do the virtual environment. And as I was going through all of my studies, I saw this term augmented virtuality, and I was like, what the heck is that? I actually had to search for that term. Not too many people are doing anything in this area, but I saw it recently come up, and it's where you take something like a live video feed and you put it into a virtual environment. So you can imagine you would have a door, or you would have a mirror or something like that that would have a live video feed. That's what it's doing. The most recent thing that I saw, somebody has virtual reality where you can actually see your hands, like real hands in the virtual environment, and you can actually start to manipulate virtual objects, which I think is pretty cool, right? So VR tries to synthesize everything you see and hear and touch and actually taste. There is a Japanese researcher that is working on virtual food, not a joke, and puts this device in your mouth so you have to, chew this virtual food. AR is slightly different. We use the physical world, and then we embed virtual stuff into it. All right. Still in the history aspect, 1996, Rikimoto came up with this tracking system that you see here. The marker that's on the right-hand side, that square, is called a fiducial. That's the technical term for it. But the thing that was cool about this is that it gave us 6 degrees of freedom. And by that, I mean that it can track both the position, the XYZ, and also the orientation of that marker. Right? So that's going to be the yaw, pitch, roll. The reason that this is so important is because if I know where this marker is in the physical world, what else can I calculate? I know where the camera is. So you can just do an inverse matrix right there, and you can figure out where the camera is. A little bit later on, we have these 3 rules by Azuma, and again, just to reiterate, combine the real and virtual worlds, interactive in real time, and registered in 3D. There will be a quiz at the end of this. Your professors all gave me no, just kidding. Also that same year, 1997, Feiner, and this was all up in University of Columbia, came up with the Turing machine. And this was the... You're actually kind of stealing my thunder there because it's like everybody's laughing. But this was the first mobile system. So let's take a look at this and see if you know your history. What is that giant disk that's floating above that guy's head? Does anyone know?
The Google visualizer?
This is 1997. But that's a great guess. Yeah.
GPS?
It is GPS. Okay, and then what is that thing that's in the back? Yes, that is a laptop. That's what they used to look like. You had to have a backpack to carry these things around. And on the front is an early form of like a tablet that you could see kind of the information that you needed to see. And of course, you have the head-mounted display and the earphones and everything else. Now, for those of you who are a bit younger, I want you to appreciate what you have in your smartphone today, because this is what we had to wear back in 1997. But it brings up a great point, because how many people would be seriously willing to walk around, let's say New York City, wearing this? So there is a huge social acceptance to all of this gear. If you look at the hype that goes on, they always put like pretty people that are in these pictures, because there has to be this buy-in by society to wear stuff like this. There's a cost associated with doing augmented reality. Okay, 1998-9, this is about when I got into it. This is when the AR toolkit came out. It's free and open source. It was written in C. So it was a relatively simple platform, but it provided all of the necessary components for doing augmented reality. And this, somebody said, to kill your heroes. Billinghurst was my hero. He's still alive because he's in New Zealand. No, I'm not really going to kill him if you're still out there. This was also some work that I did here. I toured with Duran Duran. I don't know if anybody even knows who that rock group is. Okay, a couple of you do. Maybe they're kind of reviving, but this was back in 2000. And the project that I was involved with was getting augmented reality kind of projected back behind on that giant screen. Somebody had talked about they had root access to this large display panel. And I can vouch for that. It's super cool. When your mouse is bigger than you are, like you can move the mouse and then you see it back behind the screen. It was really cool. And also it puts a lot of pressure on you. If your computer code crashes in front of 60,000 people, that's bad. Blue screen of death back behind is not what you want to have happen, and it actually happened once. It locked up, didn't blue screen, but it did lock up. But let's talk about the project. You can see one of the songs that they had was called Hallucinating Elvis, and down here on the lower right, you can see Simon Le Bon, and there's an Elvis Presley that is imaginary that's supposed to be dancing there next to him, but you can see it actually projected on the back screen. And then there's some close-up. There's me being a dork doing the little dance on this giant fiducial thing that we had printed out. I just felt the need that I had to have that picture taken, so that was me. And that's really not a very important, significant landmark, by the way. I was just kidding. It's not a huge leap forward. Okay, but this is, right? So about 2007, 2008, you had folks like Daniel Wagner and such that were working on getting things moved to a mobile device. And this was when they ported the AR toolkit onto the iPhone, and it has a YouTube video and everything else, and I should have linked to it down there. But that was a big deal. And the reason that it was a big deal is because we've always tried to get things onto mobile devices, but only until about then did they have the capabilities that we really needed to be able to pull this off, okay? So here are some famous, well, some pseudo-famous examples of augmented reality. This is probably the most famous here on the upper left. This is football. We've got the first down line. I think they have it now in hockey and all the major sports. I've even seen it in baseball where they throw the baseball, and you can see the curve, and you can see all of that kind of stuff. So it's pretty cool. The reason that they can do that is because they know exactly where the field is. They know exactly what color the field is. They know exactly the direction that the camera is facing. So they have all of that information. So it's really not that tough of a problem, but it still provides a lot of useful information. Being a gamer myself, I really appreciate the one on the right, AR Quake. This was done by Bruce Thomas in 2000, and so you can imagine you have a giant snow beast out there right after your class, computer science class, and it's waiting to kill you. And then the one here in the middle was something that I was just playing around with, and I was really disappointed. I have a lot of great ideas, and they've all been done. Like one of my ideas was, oh, wouldn't it be cool if you could take your iPad and you could look down through the world and you could see all of the countries, like where's China right now? Oh, there's China. Oh, where's Germany? Oh, it's over there. And you could actually look through the world. Done. It's like crud. Okay, that's taken. And then this one right here was, you recognize the little marker? That was, I took the video image and I used that as a texture and I actually deformed the virtual environment and then pasted it back on there. So it looks like there's this kind of thing and I had it like flopping all over the place and everything else. And it was cool. Done. So it's really disappointing. Now, I'll go ahead and tell you, somebody was talking about research. That happens all the time, and you just keep going. I think, yeah, so you can understand it. You get scooped all the time, or somebody else comes up with the idea. Other things. There was a famous study done by Harvard graduates called Private Universe. I don't know if anybody's heard of that, but they asked the recently graduated students, how do the seasons work? And the most common misperception is that it has to do with an elliptical orbit, right? It has nothing to do with an elliptical orbit, but you wouldn't really know that. If we had an elliptical orbit, we would have like 1 month of summer and then 11 months of winter, because we'd be way out there. But the reason that I'm so interested in this is because when you have very physical kinds of things in education, AR is a great application for it. If it's something boring like, I hate to say computer science, how are you going to teach computer science using augmented reality? It's probably not going to happen, right? Or it's going to be a little bit of a stretch. Okay? But you could also do things like this. On the lower right, you can see that we can reconstruct sites that are no longer there. I saw somebody do this with the Parthenon, and they were kind of showing what it would look like actually in its most pristine condition. Okay? A lot of discussion about wayfinding, and so I just ripped this off of how stuff works. So here's one implementation. Hey, what is this building here? And then it tells you what the building is. It tells you where you're going, how fast you're going, all of that kind of stuff. And then more recently, down here on the lower right, you've got Pioneer and Microvision, right? They're actually trying to put this in cars right now, and you can see this, hey, here's the line that I should follow. And immediately when I saw this, I thought of Crazy Taxi. And I can still hear that music in my head. And I was like, okay, I want Crazy Taxi, but I need to slow down. I'm not going to drive that fast. Okay? Other commercial things that I think Cadillac was involved in this, they put infrared lights on the front of their car so that you could get night vision. Because think about it, we don't see that frequency of light, so why not blast the road with infrared light, and then pick up the infrared light and then display it on the dash. So you could be able to see deer crossing the road and whatnot. I thought that was an interesting idea. Of course, there's military ideas here. It would be nice to be able to see inside of buildings and know the infrastructure if you're about to storm it. Or conversely, if you could have like firefighters, think about how valuable that would be, knowing the structure of the house as you're going through it before you enter in this, where smoke is filled the room and it kind of occludes your sight. So another interesting application there. All right, there are also collaborative scenarios here. This was more of the area that I researched. And so you can imagine we could take any of this 3D volumetric data like ultrasounds and CAT scans and everything else and then embed it into the patient during surgery. Now, let's talk about the importance of tracking. Okay, you see this image down here on the lower left. It says, cut here. What if that's an inch off? There's a problem, right? You've removed the wrong leg or something like that. So you really have to have very strict and very life, it could cause real harm. But you can see some other examples here of, intestines and babies and fetus and all that stuff. Okay, here's another scenario. It's more of a scientific visualization, and the reason that this is interesting is because we can now work with things that we couldn't work with because of scale. Right, so things that are really small or things that are really large. Just to show you kind of what this looks like, this is something that I did a long while back. You can see 2005, so I'm showing you 10-year-old stuff, okay? The tracker that I was using is actually an acoustic tracker, and you'll see an example of this. This was just some, I think it was in the fight, it's like a medicine used in AIDS research. And so we were visualizing it, and it was actually governed by a molecular mechanics simulator. So as you started to deform all of these molecules, you could see how much it took energy-wise in terms of kilojoules per mole. Not very interesting. There's your space filling algorithm. We'll skip that. Okay. Other things that you could imagine, we could send novice technicians out into the workplace and send that video feed back to the experts and say, oh, well, what do I need to do? Imagine that you're this guy down here on the bottom left and you have this huge network panel that you have no idea what these things, well, what do I need to do? You can imagine that they could make notations on your screen and they could say, oh, well, you need to start here, but they need to be in 3D. You can't just mark on their face or on their screen, because if you turn this way, what's gonna happen? That reference is gonna become stale. So we have to register things in 3D space. Okay. So hardware requirements. We have to render things, we know that. That's really not too much of a challenge. We have to have some kind of display to put it on. We have a couple of those. And then we have tracking. So let's talk about each one of those. Right, here's some traditional head-mounted displays. You have an optical, and we had talked about optical displays where you could actually look through and see the physical world. So that's optical. And then you have video. Video is good because everything lines up. We receive a video feed, and then we can put these virtual objects on the video feed. Awesome. What happens when the power goes out? You see nothing. So imagine that you've got this video camera and you're driving down the street and then the power goes out, you're not going to be able to see anything. So there's trade-offs between these traditional HMDs. This was one of the coolest demos that I've seen in a long time. What you're seeing here was done by Raskar and his colleagues. And the reason that this is interesting is there's only 3 projectors on this model. So it's a model that's completely unlit. It's just your standard kind of vanilla looking model. But all of the textures, all of the tiles, all of the bricks, everything that you see on here are rendered by the projectors. And it looks like the sun is going over the top, but it's really not. It's just casting shadows and light in the right way. So no matter which way you're looking at it, you can actually see this thing being augmented with extra data. It was awesome. It's probably more impressive when you saw it real. Right? Here's another example. This is just something I cranked out real quick. You've got a little pipe boy right there, and you could tap on the screen, and you could make the little pipe boy walk around the table, right? Why is that cool? It's just kind of fun little technology to work with. But the idea is that this display right here acts as a window into the virtual world, right? So you can see all of the virtual things through this thing, and that's currently the state that we're in. All right, we have a wide variety of tracking. What's the problem with GPS? Everybody knows? It's not accurate, right? So we had those problems before. So it's accurate enough to do really large-scale augmented reality. So if you're tracking buildings and you're outside and you're wandering around Montreal, GPS is going to work fine. But it's not going to work fine under most of the conditions that we want, okay? You also have some other ones that are really expensive, like acoustic, like time of flight kinds of things, and electromagnetic. That IS-900, I think it was about $50,000, so it's not like it's readily accessible to most of us. And then visual, and I underline visual because I think that's where the future is, right? We're able to receive, everything has a camera on it now. So we're able to receive this and then use any of these kind of technologies that are out here, like the AR toolkit, we've already seen that, but there's a couple of other new technologies that are out now that are quite impressive, okay? So how does this thing actually work? Well, if you've ever taken an image processing class, you know it's pretty easy to detect squares. So the first thing that happens is we send a frame of video out to this system, and it looks for squares. And if it can find a square, it says, okay, where are the corners of the square? Now, what do I know if the square is this big? It means that we're really close to it. What if the square is this small? It means that we're really far away. What if I see that the square, instead of it being square, is actually squished like this? Well, I know that there's a rotation along the x-axis. So that's the first phase of what's going on. So you can see kind of that goes on until we get probably right over here on the right-hand side. I don't know if you can see the mouse over there, but we identify the marker that's on the inside of that square so that we know what to overlay in the virtual environment, and then we can do the math and actually render it. Okay, so here's a little bit more advanced version, and I made this just as a tutorial to my students. We can do the same thing with image, not just a square, but now you can see we've got this guy from Unity. We work a lot with Unity. So there's a lot of points of interest. Well, that's just not playing so well. But there's, well, that's really poor, isn't it? Here, I'll just leave it like that. And so, but you can see that there's a lot of points of interest there where there's high contrast areas between dark and light. And we can do the same thing that you saw before. We can do inverse mathematics and figure out the normal of this picture so that we can then lay the virtual objects into the scene correctly. Okay, this is probably the most impressive tracking that I've seen so far, and it's similar to what you were talking about before with simultaneous localization and mapping, right? You have to figure out the environment that you're in and also where you are in the environment. And so that's a really tough problem, but these guys at 13th Lab have blown it out of the water. It's just awesome. So they went outside and they were walking around whatever city they're in, I should know that, but it was mapping the city. So this should be a little bit scary to you because think about it. Now you can have people that are just walking around this hotel room with their cameras and they've mapped everything out. They know where all the chairs are. They know where all the walls are. And the same thing is true with the cities. So they know the layout of the land and they know exactly where they are. And you can combine this with things like GPS to know what city you're in and so on and so forth. So here on the left-hand side, you can see the points that are being tracked, the high contrast points. And then right here, you actually see the point cloud that's being generated. It's awesome. If you can, go check out that technology because it really is impressive. Okay, so let's go towards mobile. We know that mobile devices have cameras. They have a screen, they can play video games, so they can render out any virtual content that we would need. So it seems like it's the perfect device, at least for now. All right, so these are some early examples that we had. Nearest tube, if you've ever ridden the tube system in London, you know that it can be a little bit difficult to find where the subway station is. And so they came out with this thing where you can just kind of glance around using accelerometers and gyros and everything to know which way you're looking. And then a similar thing with Layer. Has anybody played with Layer? Okay, a couple of you out there. This does a really good job if you're trying to find, hey, what's around me? And it can pull up any wide variety of things. Here's an example of what I worked on when I was in industry. It's a book on trying to teach kids about Chinese culture. And so there's a lot of stuff that goes on here. It's almost like developing a video game. We had to create this animatic. And I won't show you the animatic, but you can imagine that you've got this bear that's running across saying, hey, come on, let's go and let's have a good time learning Chinese culture. Here's what it would look like more after you've blasted it, just to check the animations. Hi, my name is Meilun, and I laugh a lot. Let's go, and let's hope the video doesn't crash. Boom, okay. That's really what she said, let's hope the video doesn't crash. There's also examples like this, and let me just pull this up so you can kind of see it. This was done at Georgia Tech and SCAD, and it was a zombie game. And I'll go full screen with it. And I'll just kind of skip forward to the relevant parts so you can see kind of what it was like. Like I said, you can see here on the right-hand side, he's moving this camera around and tracking against an actual image. And then using this, you play the role of a helicopter where you go and you try to save all of the citizens that are walking across from the zombies that are invading. And you can see that it's a really pretty interactive game because it requires you to stand up and to get all of these different perspectives and everything else to interact with that. It was also the first Skittle-based game that we're aware of because you could place a Skittle in the environment and you shoot the Skittle and it would blow up. It would be like this proximity mine, which I thought was, you got to give it to those Georgia Tech guys. They've got some fun stuff going on. This was a project that I was fortunate to work on actually with the same folks that you just saw, most of them. And I'm going to let this one play. And I know it's about a minute-long video, but listen for the swoosh. Let's see, hopefully this will play.
Let's finish this here and now. No. Not here. Oh, hey, you set me up. Gonna knock your block off. What is this? It's Mattel. Of course. Mattel. Knocking the block off new technology.
Right. So that was a fun project. And believe it or not, it looks like a relatively straightforward kind of game, but you realize, when you have somebody whose responsibility is to punch, how should they punch? Do they hit a button every time they punch? Well, you know what's going to happen to the camera when you hit the button that fast and your camera's shaking all over the place and then you lose tracking because it can't figure out what the heck's going on? So there were a lot of interesting interface issues that we had when we were designing that. It was a great project to work on. This one, I'll kind of let it play in the background. The reason that this was important, this company is now no more, I think, but look at the great way that they tied it into the physical world. Or not. Oh, hopefully it'll come back. Did I click it again? Okay. We'll just assume that was awesome and everybody's got to go buy that product right now. But anyway, what had happened there is that you would actually use the environment that you had, like Kleenex boxes and little boards and everything else, and it would be able to understand the layout of the physical space, and you could race on it. And so you had these two cars that you could actually jump over the Kleenex boxes and everything else. Again, another beautiful example of how we can integrate these two things. Okay, so general challenges that we have. First thing is that we have a lot of information that we can visualize, so it comes down to an information visualization problem as part of it, so we need techniques to be able to handle it in an AR context. Also, we always have tracking problems, but given the trackers that we have, how do you deal with things when things are slightly off? Is it okay for things not to match up exactly? Like how much registration error can we take? Another thing, because we deal a lot with mobile, are traditional mobile problems like weight and battery life. You have to deal with those. And then also we have a wealth of interaction techniques. And just to show you what I mean by that, how would you touch a virtual object? How would that even occur? What would it feel like? How are you supposed to manipulate this? And so here are some early examples of a project called Studio Stuba. And yeah, try saying that. So imagine you're having to move around these little markers and everything and keep them in view the whole time. So you can see an example of that down here on the lower right, and here's an example of something that I did previously before, also a very similar kind of setup. Okay, one of the common critiques that a lot of people have is initially when this tracking technology came out, everybody wanted some of it. It's like, oh, I've got to get a car on this little piece of paper, or I've got to get a cube, or I've got to get a McDonald's symbol, or I've got to get whatever it is, and I've got to put it on a piece of paper, and it's just awesome. And it is awesome for the first 5 minutes. And then after that, you kind of expect a little bit more. And so if you look at a lot of the examples that are out there, they almost serve as more of just triggers. There's no real reason that it has to be in augmented reality. So you can see right here, the SolidWorks thing, it was an early example, and it's nice, but what are you going to do with it? Why not just have a VR environment or a traditional application where you can spin it around? Why does it have to be AR as opposed to some other kind of thing? And so you can see Aerometrics and Toyota and a lot of car companies like doing this, and you can see the different colors of cars and things like that. So you don't want the world to be confined to a plate, let's say. And actually, Mary Beth Gandy was the person who I should give credit to for that idea. Okay, other challenges. Because we are standing like this, how long can you stand like this for? If anybody's held out something for quite some time, you know that you get tired relatively quick. And also, are you going to be willing to walk down the streets of New York City doing all of this kind of stuff? Probably not, because you don't want to stand out. It's a social stigma. Also, you have to print out images. So is that really augmented reality? Is that how you want that to work? You're going to carry around a piece of paper with you to be able to play your games? Also, there's a lot of training because so few people know about augmented reality. They don't know that you have to focus the camera on the little square or on the image because they're going to want to look around and see what else that they can see. And as soon as you do that, everything's not going to work. All right? So there's a lot of user training that we have to worry about there. They were summed up best by this article that I read, 5 common errors in augmented reality. First one is poor education and training. Lack of content is a big one. Right? So you have to have more than a cube. Different applications for each campaign. So we need something that's a little bit more generic. There's a huge need for that. Also the fact that AR is just a gimmick, so we can put stuff on this little plate and everybody's just blown away. Oh, I want to see some more of that. And then also the interaction with the content. That's a huge one. And this is kind of where I tack on a couple of extra things. So I think that user acceptance is going to be key in the future, right? First of all, if there's problems with the application, what are people going to do with it? They're going to chuck it out the window. They're not going to use it anymore. And then also, I've seen this, and nobody's really willing to admit it, but users are lazy. Everybody out there is lazy. And you think about it. We've seen the Kinect, and I'm not insulting you. Don't take that the wrong way. But how many people still play the Kinect? Right? So a lot of people buy the Kinect. How many people still play it? And the reason is because it's much easier for me to sit down on the couch and play the game and just smash the buttons. Agreed? Otherwise, I'd have to get up and I'd have to break a sweat, and I'm just way too lazy to do that. The same thing is true in augmented reality. How much of a burden are you willing to put on your users to sit there and stand like this for 15 minutes at a shot? They're probably not going to be willing to do that. Okay? So these AR experiences, there has to be a reason, something that forces them. There's no other way that they could get that content other than AR, and that's what we would have to have. Okay? And so there's still not this killer app, and I'm going to come back to that in just a second. How are we doing on time? 10 minutes, okay, I'm going to skip over this. If you want to research stuff, come talk with me. All right, if you want to build stuff, there's another example of the points of interest that we were talking about. Let's just kind of skip forward to this part right here, okay? So I noticed, this is the first time, this is not a joke, I grew this beard out for you guys because I'm coming to Canada and it's cold, and I found that out, and I'm glad I did. So, But when I did that, I noticed that I have a lot of gray stuff in there, and then I started thinking, really, I'm just this old guy, and I've kind of realized that I'm cool with that, right? But I want you to appreciate kind of the history, and some of you older folks out there may like this too. I started programming when I was 11 years old. I had a VIC-20, okay? They don't make those anymore, for better or worse. And then right after that, I had a Commodore 64. And when you bought a computer back in those days, it actually came with the manual, right? So you could learn how to program from the manual because you bought the computer. And so I remember getting stuck with arrays, but this is what I had to deal with. I didn't even have, to begin with, this cassette deck and the little floppy reader. I didn't have any of that stuff at the time. These were the games that I played, some wonderful games, but look at the graphics there. They're still fun to play, I guess, but the graphics were pretty poor. And actually, I subscribed to something called Compute Gazette, and this is not a joke. In the back of Compute Gazette, it gave you hexadecimal code that you could type into your own computer to play these games. I would spend hours typing E1, F9, and no joke, like 3 hours later I would have a video game, and as soon as the power went off, that game was gone. Yeah, okay? So we're gonna skip all of the intermediate stuff. I eventually landed at the Georgia Tech Audio Lab. Down there on the lower left is Mary Beth Gandy. She's a great friend, but she is one awesome researcher. I can't say enough about her. And then some other folks that are friends of mine too, and that's when I saw the AR Toolkit for the first time. But the reason that I'm bringing up all this history is really to talk about the future of AR. So where are we going to go if all of this stuff starts to work perfectly? The reason that I'm saying this isn't so much to really truly try to predict, it's more to dispel hype. There's a lot of hype about everything, and it's a business technique, and I understand that. There's a lot of, Google Glass down here, they're talking about the possibilities of that, and there's still a lot of possibilities there. Iron Man, all of my students come up and say, oh, have you seen Iron Man? Yes, I've seen Iron Man a couple times, and I'll reference that again. And I have no idea why I put this other guy in the... I just found that on the web, and I thought, I'm going to include that. Okay, but let's see where it stands with regard to the criteria that we really have, okay? So I was fortunate enough to see Ray Kurzweil talk, and I don't know if you know who that is, but it was just a fantastic talk. And he's looked at the exponential growth of everything that we have with regard to technology in our lives. And so, we see that with Moore's Law, we see that with graphics cards, we see that with all this kind of stuff. He's also seen it with human lifespans because technology supports lifespans. So he says at some point, the technology that supports our life grows faster than we age. Think about that. Right? So that's a kind of creepy thing. So, if you, I guess, are born late enough, then there's the potential to live forever. I think that was the inference that you had, right? So tie that in with this exponential growth with also the things that we've seen in science fiction, like Rainbow's End. I don't know if anybody's read it, but it had a lot of AR references, and it talked about, if I wanted to look like Brad Pitt, then I can hit the Brad Pitt plug-in, and then all of a sudden, boom, everybody sees me as Brad Pitt, and I'm awesome, look at me kind of thing. So it had a lot of those futuristic kinds of things in it. I don't know if Brad Pitt is still a valid reference, but I'm certainly not going to say Justin Bieber, it's not going to happen. Okay, so let's see this exponential growth then with graphics. You have graphics, 1983, this is the game that I would play. And then in 2001, Final Fantasy, and I can't remember the rest of the name of the title, came out. And everybody was like, oh my gosh, did you see the graphics in Final Fantasy? It was so awesome. It was a little bit creepy though. If you know what the uncanny valley is, like when it gets close to looking real, but not really real, people get creeped out. And this guy, the doctor, whatever his name was, creeped me out because he looked like a kind of a mummy. They had most of it down, but not exactly. Where it really started to convince me was in 2008, I saw a video by Image Metrics, and the video, the face that you see up there is totally CG, right? All of the expressions, all of those small muscle movements that were, necessary for real communication were in that video. And then at the very end, it freaked me out. They showed this, like, the specular map for her face, and then they showed all these other kinds of things, like the geometry. It's an amazing video, and I was like, oh my gosh. So think about what's going to happen if graphics cards doubled between every 6 months and a year. Let's say it's every 6 months. In 5 years, we'll have something about 1,000 times more powerful than we have today. What does that mean we're going to be able to believe when we see anything on TV? Right? So they can fake wars. They can fake whatever they want. And then combined with this technology we're talking about, it becomes a little problematic. Tracking, we've already seen. We know where we are. We know what we're looking at. We also know who we're looking at. So I don't know if you've seen this. Facebook just purchased this. It's called Deep Face. And here's an interesting statistic. So Deep Face recognizes 97.25% accurately, regardless of the orientation of the face. Okay? So you're thinking, oh, I'm going to trick it. I'm going to turn this way. No, it's still going to recognize you, right? And to put that into perspective, if you look, humans are accurate up to 97.53% of the time. I would call that good enough. So you start to think about it. Now we know where we are. We know what we're looking at. We know who we're interacting with and everything else. And so we've got all of the tracking down. What about displays, right? I don't want to have to look around like this. Wouldn't it be nice if I could just jack into the matrix? Anybody willing to do that, by the way? If you knew it was running like just everyday operating systems, would you still be? You would still do it. All right, good man. But anyway, so I ask that a lot, and it's getting more and more every year, which is surprising. But anyway, displays, this might be a very viable option. At the University of Washington, they're coming out with displays. You can see the optical combiner. Nobody's going to wear that, right? The social stigma. But wouldn't it be nice if we had some contact lenses that we could pop in, that we could actually have as a display? And that's exactly what's going on. You can see here it's charged by it's charged by light. And then it displays whatever information that you would want to send to it. So they're still working on that, and I think they're making really good strides on that. So you might see some AR contacts coming out in the next 10 years, let's say. Okay? So there are a lot of interesting good things that we could do. Wouldn't it be nice if you could remember everybody's name? You could go out there and you could kind of visualize, oh, where was this lamp made? And you could find out all the information and get all of these wonderful apps and know where you're going at all times. And then you start to think conversely, how can we abuse this technology? You start thinking of the darker side of humanity, and what could we do? Well, if you ever read Brave New World, you know that there was a drug called Soma, right? It was this hallucinogen that the state-sponsored kind of thing, and they encouraged people, hey, have you had a bad day? Just take some Soma, and then you can go on this holiday. They call it a holiday. Could we not do the same thing with augmented reality in the future? Think about it. You've had a bad day. You go home. You pop in your contact lenses if they're not already in, and you see whatever you want to see. Makes you start to think, right? Like, what would I want to see when I went home? And then you really start questioning yourself. But then also there's a question of like the digital divide, the people who are on the internet and the people who aren't on the internet, right? So there's a distinct advantage to people who have access to that information. Is that going to be the case with augmented reality? People who have instant access and they can visualize it in all these different ways that other people who are not involved, you can see there's some problems there. I'm not saying that it's going to happen, but it's certainly a potential. And then finally, to conclude this talk, I remember I was watching Iron Man 2, and I told you there was going to be another reference to Iron Man in here. And now it didn't dawn on me. Everybody talks about the killer app, right? There's no killer app for AR. I remember it dawned on me when I was watching Iron Man 2 because there was a scene where Howard Stark was talking to Tony Stark. Some of you probably know what I'm talking about. And he says, hey, Tony, take my plans. I don't have the technology today that I need to implement what it is that I'm trying to do. And then it dawned on me, we're in the exact same situation with augmented reality because we have the killer apps. We have wayfinding. We have all of these things that we could be doing, but we don't have the technology to support it. Right? So I'm thinking that shortly, once all of these things start to come together and we can pull these systems together, then we have plenty of killer apps that we're going to be able to download and put into these systems. So that is it for me. Thank you for your time. I guess I'll ask. Are there any questions? Yes.
Hi there, thanks for the talk. I just wanted to ask you, based off a lot of the stuff you mentioned on the future of the technologies that are coming out, or maybe coming out, is there something that you're particularly excited about, personally?
I am excited about the contact lenses, because it's one of those things need to get smaller and smaller. They need to be less obtrusive in our daily life, and I think that that's a major breakthrough. I think, we can probably keep phones this size. Are phones going to get smaller and smaller? Probably not, because there's a usability component. So I think that they could, if we had these contact lenses. It comes down to the technology that supports AR, and what the big one is the display. So that I would say I would be excited. I know, and I'm not trying to take any questions away from the guys in the back, but somebody's going to ask about the Oculus Rift. There he goes. There's one. There's two. No, you can stay there. But the reason that I say that is because, and the same thing is true with Project Glass from Google. Those are all wonderful things, and they encourage tons of research that is absolutely necessary. And so I'm really glad that they're doing things like that. But where does it tie in necessarily with augmented reality? The Oculus Rift is great for virtual reality, right? Because you think about it, it's kind of a block view, and you could certainly put a camera on the front of that. And the reason that I like it is because, again, every 10 years or something, a new technology comes out, and the Oculus Rift has vastly lowered the barrier of entry to building some of these virtual reality applications. So I'm really appreciative for what they've done there. So that's what I had to say about the Rift. That's not a rant, by the way. That's just me. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, you might have talked about the virtual reality thing and like the differences between that and augmented reality. But my question is more related to, you focused a lot on the visual aspect of augmented reality, and I was wondering if you could comment on maybe the other senses that will eventually be incorporated into augmented reality to interact with other objects.
Sure. There have been, so there's auditory examples. So there's, imagine all of the auditory cues that we're getting here. If we heard an alarm, let's say in the back or something like that, you could do those spatial kinds of sounds. I know that in terms of 3D sound, they're making great progress. But realize, we have ears, and from what I understand, there's like 5 or 6 major categories of ears, and I didn't know that. But that's the reason that we hear, the ears tell us the frequencies. So if like you snap behind or in front of your head, how do you know that? If I snap to the right, it hits this ear first, right? So they're making all of these strides there. What I didn't really talk too much about is not only the auditory piece, but can we do something that's not visual at all? I worked on a project where it was called Parallel Worlds with somebody from the English department, where you carry around your device, and as you start to walk around and other people do this on the campus, it would write a story for you about the parallel world that you subscribe to. So it could be zombie infestation, we had one of those things. It could be that you're a knight saving whatever. There's a future fantasy, there's a steampunk, there's all of that kind of stuff. And it would, at the end of the day, it says you entered the creepy building. You saw that it was dilapidated, and and it would write this story out for you based on the actual events that occurred in the real world. So there's a lot of possibilities there with what you were asking. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hey, how you doing?
Hi.
Good?
I'm doing great, yeah. My talk is over. I feel great.
Having a good conference so far?
I've had a wonderful conference. And thank you all to making me feel welcome. It's really good to talk with everybody. And I'm not just saying that.
Cool. So I was wondering, with all these things sort of like deep face, where they're able to recognize like 97% of a human face, and with being able to track the insides of hotels and our landscapes and stuff like that, what do you think are some of like the implications of privacy issues with that, with AR in maybe 5-10 years?
Well, I could conversely ask you the same thing, because we're in the same boat there. I think Facebook in particular, and I'm not picking on Facebook, it's a great way to keep in touch with friends, but when you start diving into information like this, you really have to question what you're going to do with your camera on your phone. You have to question everything that you're going to potentially post. And so somebody said, well, I'm just going to go back and I'm going to shut my Facebook account down. It's too late. If there's even one picture of you on your professional website or something like that shows you in your business suit, it's too late, because they have all the information that they would need. And so, of course, there's huge privacy issues that are there. And I can envision a future also, and it's kind of the darker side, but you don't know who you're talking to at all. If you can overlay whatever you want to overlay in your view, what's to say I can't look like whoever I want to look like? And there could be a lot of deception issues and ethics issues, and it all kind of ties in. I think we're seeing that in all of these fields, and they're starting to merge together. And AR is just a central point because it involves so many different disciplines.
Cool. And one other thing, my friend texted me to ask you what you thought of the Meta Space Glass.
I don't have a lot of experience with that, so I can't really answer that.
All right.
Yeah.
Cool. Cheers. Thanks.
Yep.
So my question is, do you think we're actually integrating the technology faster than we understand it?
Well, it's like a senior project.
No.
I hate to say it, it's kind of research anyway. You pull together, in a lot of research, you don't know what you're doing, to be honest. You say, I have an idea, and I'm just going to build a system, and then I'm going to see what happens with it. And so sometimes it causes really bad things, and sometimes, hopefully, it causes good things as well. And so the integration, I would say, is maybe not even occurring fast enough. And the reason I'm saying that is because when you get to the level of information that you would need, you have to have a lot of the big players that are willing to play with each other.
But the scope of my question was more that as a society, do you think we're actually going too fast when it comes to developing technology?
I'll just say that I log into Facebook once a year. That's all I'm going to say, right? Because I'm kind of off the grid a bit. I think no matter what it is, you have to be careful whenever you give any information to someone else. Because as soon as you do that, then they're going to start to take it. So to answer your question explicitly, I don't know.
All right, thanks for your insight.
It depends. Look, it depends on the intentions of the people that you're working with. Let's say, it can be good intentions and it can be bad. And if it's bad, then certainly there's a room for abuse and the integration. Yeah, sure, we're just going to pull all this stuff. I mean, think about what Amazon. I know Amazon's a sponsor, but think about what Amazon knows about you, and Google knows about you, and Facebook knows about you, and then think about if they all got together in this, let's say this room here in this hotel or something like that. Let's share information. They would know pretty much everything about you. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know. I can't really answer that question, but it depends on your personal opinions.
All right, thanks for your answer.
You mentioned Steve Mann in your talk. Steve Mann has an idea called surveillance. Do you think that augmented reality and being able to perceive and map images and spaces will have any role in that?
Can you restate your question? So I want to make sure I understand what you're...
Do you think that with augmented reality and being able to perceive the world through a different lens, surveillance, the way Steve Mann presented it, like perceiving everything from below and recording everything from below, will become more prevalent and something that's accepted in society?
I think, to me, there's no doubt. Look at, while everyone in this room is probably a purely ethical person, maybe. Where's that BitTorrent guy, right? No, but the reason that I'm saying that is because you'll always have people who try to subvert everything that you do. You can have the best intentions. We saw a wheelchair app. Somebody would probably purposely try to make it go haywire while it's in the mall or something like that. So you're always going to have subversion and people that are trying to break the system just because they can, and then they can claim, oh, we did this. There's a huge terrorism situation that we have. We have people that are willing to take down systems no matter what the cost is. So I can always envision that there are people that are out there that could take this technology or any other technology and change it into whatever they want to for their purposes. I'm not a fear monger, by the way. I'm not trying to scare everyone in here. I know there's a lot of future questions like, well, what do you think about this? I really don't know. Yeah, go ahead.
So I feel like there's a lot of questionable engineering in software. Like, everything's always full of bugs. How do you what are your hopes? How do you think it's gonna turn out for augmented reality in that sense? You've mentioned that during your talk, I think.
To be honest, I think the augmented reality systems will be less faulty than the information that they're trying to display. So I can imagine that you have this future system that you wear and you can see whatever you want to see and everything else, but the information that you're fed could be faulty. So I see there being more error in that side of it than the augmented reality system, because realistically it's a system and they can get better. And I don't think we're too far away from having some kind of framework in place for augmented reality applications. It's just the information that you're leveraging.
I'm just here to make sure that nobody asks any more questions because we're out of time. But thank you.
Okay, thank you for your time.